So I want to thank you again for being here. And you talked about the evolution of NIL. My question is, where we are now, do you see that bleeding into high school? Because I know that we've had some conversations about that. And if so, what are the current restrictions for high school students as it relates to NIL? And where is that going in the next few years?
Yeah, great question. Short answer is yes, it definitely is seeping into youth sports and high school sports. And it really becomes a state by state question because state law and or specifically high school athletic associations that kind of govern high school sports in particular, it's going to come from one of those two places, meaning there may be a state NIL law, as we know those have kind of affected colleges and universities, but sometimes those also affect kids who are in high school playing club sports, high school sports. And so more states have warmed up to it. That's why I say it's a state by state issue. So depending on literally where you are sitting as a parent, a high school athlete, those sorts of things, it can be different from one state to the next.
Mm.
Some have warmed up to it more quickly than others, in terms of not having any high school eligibility impacts if a kid does some NIL. And contextually, those states or high school athletic associations who have changed their rules to make it more permissible would still have some regulations around it. And one example, just for context sake, is an athlete who's in high school might not be able to, for example, use their high school marks or anything in their endorsement. So if they're doing something on social media, you got to switch into something other than like your team sweatshirt or school sweatshirt because they didn't have the rights to it. It's a similar dynamic that college students run into as to whether they have the rights to use their school marks or not. But that's an example. And there can be other things like not missing class, not skipping out of your high school classes to go do a commercial shoot, those sorts of things. So there's a lot going on, but it is definitely starting to cascade into high school levels for sure.
Yeah, the reason I asked is because I remember listening to a local radio station, and there was two high school kids doing an ad for the company. They were like, "I'm so and so, this position from this school," and I was like, "Wait, is that bleeding to NIL? Is that what they're doing? Are they paying these kids? Are they doing it pro bono?" It made me wonder that question because I did hear these kids using their own name in these commercials for these companies.
For
So.
sure. And you know what's interesting, KB, is as you think about how these transactions even work, you're also still dealing with youth who are minors who may not even be able to enter into contracts. So
Right.
the role of their parent, guardian, someone in that capacity does need to literally be at the table when these are negotiated and transacted out. But we're also seeing at the college level where coaches and the schools themselves have to kind of do an inventory, especially if we're talking higher profile athletes. In a couple of good examples, and one for sure, just of recent note, is Cooper Flegg, the basketball player
Mhm.
goes to Duke. Well, he had deals coming in the door, and he was a high school athlete, was able to secure, for example, a New Balance endorsement. Ironically, him being from the state of Maine, that's where New Balance was located. So when people ask me all the time, how do you get these deals? They come from all sorts of scenarios. In this case, familiarity and geography being an advantage for him. But Duke's not a New Balance school. We're well aware of that. They're a Nike school. And so there had to be sort of a conversation about what he can do, when he can't do it, when's he wearing Nike gear, when's he not. Those sorts of dynamics will continue to be something everyone involved, the school, the athlete, the family, agents of the athletes, and even the companies, in this case, apparel, have to be thinking about. But that's a very high profile example of, like, for sure, some of the high school activity is actually starting to be something colleges have to look at as well.
Yeah. So how do you help navigate these parents who probably have, some of them may have never seen a contract before, trying to navigate through that to make the best decision for their child? What role do you play in navigating with the parents? Because the kids are bright-eyed, right? They're excited. They're like, yes, but how do you coach those parents through this?
For sure. Well, it's one thing I have a deep passion for. My entire career has been in college athletics, but one thing I've always enjoyed doing is whenever there's an opportunity to do outreach to parents, help them educate, to just make good decisions informed, because all the scenarios are all a little different. They may not have a child who's the next Cooper Flegg or Caitlin Clark or what have you, but everyone's got their own version of what that college athletics and high school athletics and NIL journey looks like. So, in addition to just reviewing contracts and assisting them with the mechanics of an agreement, which is one thing I can help them with. It's also sort of thinking through bigger picture things and opportunities like, hey, exclusivity in this particular agreement may bar you and your child from pursuing other opportunities that may be more lucrative or maybe of higher interest. So you got to think a little bit more broadly, and some of that's the coaching up, if you will, around NIL, and that includes the parents as much as the athletes themselves. Because one thing certainly we're all naturally attracted to is what's that dollar sign? How much am I going to get? The one detail they want to know is what's next to that dollar
Yeah.
sign. But everything else around it is also very important. So just making sure folks are informed as they walk up and agree to those things. And then you think about things like, how does that fit into the rest of your life and your day to day as an athlete, as a student, your friend circle, your commitments. And I think about, as we're heading into summer here pretty soon, of all the tournaments and travel team, and depending on what sports you play, it's become year round at the youth level. So if you're starting to get more into NIL, which is great, but how do those opportunities fit into the rest of things so that they're not compromised? And I really think it's important for both parents and athletes to think about the time commitment and what you are also giving up, not just your name and image and the value of that, but everything that you have to put into the actual activation.
What are some things that athletes need to consider to prep for NIL? Is it media training? Is it making sure your social media looks good? We know that there is a valuation that's done to determine how high your value is. But what are some other intangible things that maybe they don't think about when it comes to being presentable to a particular brand who may want to give you a deal?
You hit on a couple of them, so I'm going to start there. Then they're super important. Media training, the ability to communicate, especially when things like video is king, as we say in the social media world, right? That often gets the most traction in terms of views and clicks and things like that. So, and that's something we all learn, right? As adults, we're still practicing. I know I am. You're always kind of trying to hone the craft of communication, and especially now we're in a world where we have these virtual conversations as often as in person. So that's one for sure. You mentioned social media and doing really kind of a scrub of that. There are platforms and companies that can help with that too, as well as media training. There are really specialty sort of companies and consultants out there that help with these things, but that's important too, not only for NIL, but for recruiting. I spend a lot of time talking and advising and educating around the recruiting process, not about just help me get my kid recruited. There's a lot of recruiting services who narrow in on that, and that is a lane. But I try to help parents and athletes think about a little bit more broadly, what could trip you up? You can blast at a million coaches 10 times a day and tell them who you are and how great you are in a sport. But that social media post from 3 years ago that does not put you in a good light could just cost you across the board, where they lose interest like that. So being really mindful about what your brand is, and even thinking about things, and this is where, I think you're going to laugh at this, like athletes think, well, I can have my sort of professional branded account and I can just do what I want over in the second
My
account.
burner account.
Yeah, my burner account, hey coach, don't look over here account. That's a teachable moment. So that's something, and this is also a dynamic where parents would go, I didn't even know that account existed. But I could tell you, and I just talked to companies even recently who are in the NIL sponsorship game, and they will scrub and research. So just know, as an athlete, as a parent, you are being researched, because now think of yourself as a business in a way, but that's an asset and an investment that a company is making into you, whether it's to post some things on social media or make an appearance or whatever the transaction involves. They're going to want to know as much about you, because they don't want their brand harmed by some things that you have out there. So really being thoughtful about, especially on social media, and thinking that everything's fair game if it's findable.
Absolutely. So I'm curious for you to share about people not understanding where these NIL deals come from and these monies come from, because a lot of people say, well, how does UNC not have money to pay people NIL when they're a big school, right? People aren't understanding where this pool of money come from. They don't understand where the budget line, the item line is coming from. Can you explain for people that may not understand exactly what an NIL budget looks like and where that money actually comes from?
Sure, that's a great question. And actually, there's a few layers to this. first, as we're kind of in this huge renaissance of which the NCAA is changing rules, there's some litigation that's going to impact both laws as well as what the NCAA is allowing and not allowing. And what I'm saying with that is schools themselves can get more involved directly in NIL with their own athletes than they were even just a couple of years ago, where it was, hey, you can do sort of outside deals, but the school is going to be helpful to do education about maybe contracts or financial literacy, but they're not really going to be right in the middle of all this. Well, now they can be right in the middle of all this, and that will change, including how they invest and how they set their budget. So it's getting to the point, and again, we have some pending litigation with this House case that some folks may have heard about. But if the settlement terms get approved by the judge, what that's going to allow is actually direct revenue sharing, where in essence, athletes, not everyone, and that's important to know here, this is not an entitlement or a mandate, but based on where the athletes, especially in sports like your men's and women's basketball, football, and some others, women's volleyball is probably a sport that's kind of in this neighborhood, but schools are going to be able to say, look, we're going to give you X thousands of dollars, and some of this could be very significant six-figure deals, maybe even higher, and we're going to ask you to do a variety of things to really either endorse and do activations for our school or with our school partners, because the athletics department has a bunch of corporate partners. So you almost have like a triangular relationship that can happen. Each school is going to look at how much they can budget, though, to your question, how much money and where's this coming from? That's going to be a big piece. That whole dynamic of revenue sharing primarily will live amongst the Power Four conferences, your ACC, SEC, Big Ten, and Big 12. And it will include some others for sure in Division One, but that's primarily where revenue sharing will exist. And then you think about all the other types of NIL opportunities that are out there. And I mentioned agents briefly. Well, athletes can now hire people to go help them find these deals. And so there are such things as online marketplaces where third-party companies, they do the job of going and getting a bunch of brands, and then athletes can sign up for free with their own profiles. And a company may come along and say, look, we sell volleyball gear. And so we're looking for 20 volleyball student athletes across the country who may have 25,000 followers or more on these platforms. You kind of start to see where these formulas come from. And so an athlete might get pinged and go, hey, would you do this for $5,000? Post, twice a month for the next 6 months, those kinds of things. And so there are so many ways in which an individual athlete, even if they're not getting a rev share offer from their school, can still pursue either on their own and or with help from an agent with some deals. And there's also sort of a cottage industry called NIL collectives. And these are almost like third-party groups that really do some fundraising and do some transaction of NIL opportunities that are kind of tied to a school, but it's separate. This is to the point of like where schools really couldn't directly get involved. Well, then NIL collectivists sprung out of nowhere, where it was, hey, we're alums of this school, we're going to help do this on our own, but any athlete that goes to our school, we're going to try to help find them deals. So that's another example of how these deals come about. But it really is, a million different ways to do this, and in a good way, that's opportunity at its core. But athletes need to be thoughtful about kind of even how they go about doing this. One, if they want to do it. I remember being on campus and an athlete coming up to me and going, Matt, do I have to do this NIL stuff? And it was refreshing. And you're like, good, I don't. Some people are just not interested in it, and it's totally fine too. I think that's important to think about as we talked about the high school kids. Same thing applies to college. Where does this fit into your busy life? How are you managing your time? What's your brand and those kinds of things. But the opportunities and where the money comes from, primarily from the companies themselves that want to do the activations, but now the schools can kind of get more involved too. So athletes will benefit in that regard.
That makes me think of a question in relations to the ones that are not high profile. Those students that may go to a JOCU, maybe they go to a D3 school, maybe they're NAIA. How do they get NIA? How to get NIL opportunities? Because like you said, the Caitlin Clarks, Cooper Flags, Shador Sanders, Travis Hunter, like they're big, they're going to get their money. But what about those kids who are like, they're very good, but they maybe don't have that spotlight like those students?
Yeah, great question. And the first thing I'll say is there are athletes that you don't see much on television. that do play college sports, whether it's D2, D3, smaller Division I, junior college, NAIA. There are opportunities out there. The ones who have been successful at it, I see it doing a couple of things. One is they were really interested in this before they even stepped foot on a college campus. They were already working and kind of honing in on their brand, if you will. They were already doing some things that built an audience. And some athletes have, north of 100,000, sometimes even more, who aren't Cooper Flag. Like they have built a following, maybe for other reasons. And the second thing that sometimes or oftentimes goes with that is what are you interested in? Where do you like to spend your free time, and where do you spend your money and things like that? So whether it's, hey, I love shopping at this particular XYZ store, or I think that these candles are the best thing ever, and here's why. You might want to reach out to that company and go, look, I've got all these followers. I love your product. I think we can maybe collaborate on something. So thinking as an entrepreneur a little bit can help if you're especially at a D2, D3. And again, will these be $1 million deals? Probably not. Those are the exceptions to the rule. I think also is a lesson here is that there's a lot of opportunity, but it may be getting free product. It may be getting some $100 deals, $1,000 here or there. That's still good too, but just want to be realistic about what the landscape, and that includes D1 athletes who aren't going to make millions of dollars doing this either. So, but I think there's ways for athletes, and I mentioned like platforms, they're called NIL marketplaces, and you meaning the athlete can sign up for free, create your own profile. And that's where these companies can find you. And so that's one thing to think about, not just your own social media accounts, but where else can I get myself in front of brands that are actually interested in doing NIL? And that's something I've seen some D2 and D3 athletes take advantage of.
Well, I love that you showcase that, hey, you may not be able to get these $1 million deals because those are kind of anomalies, but you can still get hundreds and thousands. And I remember being a college student, my parents mailed me boxes of food. Okay. So let me just tell you, if I can make some thousands of dollars a year, I would have been pretty happy. And I think the essence of the student athlete sometimes gets lost when we see the 6-7 figure NIL deals, that some people forget that that's not a reality. So how do you coach those athletes and those parents who sometimes may think that they see a Shador, a Cooper, or something like that, and think their kid's going to do that, when reality is, if you look at the NIL tracker that the NCAA has on this website now, it will show you that most of those kids don't make that money. How do you coach those parents and those students for the realities of what to expect in this world?
100%. Yeah, it goes like this for me. It's keep your feet on the ground, knowing that if those opportunities and you find yourself in that jet stream is sort of if you're in that rarefied air and you're up here and most of us fly over here, it's like, well, then there's a new set of questions and things to be thinking about, including making sure you hire professional help. You like all these athletes we know by name have like literally well-established professional agents. I think that's super important, who have done marketing deals and handled this for pro athletes. This is what they do. So if you do find yourself in that sort of, gosh, we're getting all sorts of opportunities and these are significant dollars, that's great. Don't count on it. It's like I use the analogy of I need to plan to win the lottery. I don't control winning the lottery. I love thinking about what it would be like to win the lottery. I think we all do at some point, right? But you can't plan everything around something you don't control. And then same goes with recruiting. Like when I hear parents go, my kid's a D1 athlete, they're going to play one of these 3 schools and their kid's 14, 15 years old. I say that it's good to have those aspirations, but keep your lens much broader. Don't rule out some other schools because those may be the only ones that are still interested by junior, senior year. So the recruiting and NIL process kind of go hand in hand in that respect. But I tell, and this is tricky because athletes can feel the pressure even within their inner circle to make this money when it's even coming from family members or, again, close confidants, friends, whoever. That's become its own dynamic to kind of keep an eye on. And I would even say that's going to be certainly a dynamic at the high school level, but the college level, I know for a fact that some athletes are feeling that pressure. Where's that money? And it's coming from family members. So like there's some other subtlety or secondary storylines that are kind of important in their own right. But I think through this process, keep your feet on the ground. When you start talking contracts and things that have legal implications, that's when you should be thinking about hiring help. And on the other side of that, once you go forward and an athlete has these great deals, we talk about financial literacy all the time, KB. That includes like paying taxes, understanding how to do that. Look, especially at that age, this was foreign to me. I had to learn, and we all do. We go through that process. But that's why these young athletes, even if they're of age, 18, 19, 22 years old, they still need professional help. They need that expertise. So I would just share with parents, don't be afraid to go seek professional help. Do your homework. Don't expect things to work out exactly what you want them to, because rarely it happens that way. Whether it's injury, illness, a coaching change, people lose interest, whatever the case might be. But whether it's recruiting or NIL, you can't count on anything until it actually happens or a particular offer is in front of you. Everything short of that, you're just still in the process with everyone else.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you talk about financial literacy and taxes because we have seen a very, very famous football player that had some legal issues as a college student dealing with some of this stuff. So I'm glad that you highlighted that and shared that. So is that something that you talk about? Is that a warning that you tell them like, hey, make sure that you understand this, or is this something you wait until they have a larger deal? Like, where do you position that conversation for them?
Well, having been part of an athletics department that, especially across the country, whether it's D1, D2, or D3, we really champion the notion of life skills. You know, part of being a college athlete is also learning everything from writing my resume to good interview skills to preparing for the rest of life. Even though there's some great opportunities from an NIL standpoint, including significant money, and it's nothing to shy away from. But one of those life skills, whether you're making $1 million in NIL or zero, is financial literacy and understanding about taxes, understanding about, financial management, meaning like, hey, if I come in with a lump sum of money, I shouldn't just go and spend it because I think it's just going to keep coming. We all wish it would keep coming, but that's easier said than done, right? So thinking about saving, thinking about investing, thinking about 401k and explaining what these instruments are that we all, as we get into sort of the workforce and the real world, as they say, but college athletes and NIL kind of provides literally a vehicle to say, hey, you have landed on $300,000. This is a significant amount of money. Pretty rare for a college student generally to be taking in that kind of money, but don't assume that this is going to be what it looks like long term. So what can we do with that? And be thinking about it longer term for that money to last. In addition to, as you mentioned, like tax and other obligations. Talking to student athletes around the country, some think, hey, if I just get this Venmo to me in the payment, that's not taxable. Or if the IRS doesn't find out about it, it's not taxable. Like just some, yes, not good thought, right? But again, we're talking, this is part of the learning process, but it is real world too. And so I know there's a lot of programming that schools do for students in general, but including athletes around financial literacy and money management, and it's super important.
So I know we have a few minutes here, and I just love for you to speak again about what you do, who you service, and also who can maybe reach out to you if they have questions, because this is really valuable information. And I know you have a newsletter. Kelly told me about that as well. So I'm definitely going to be signing up just so I can also continue these nuggets.
Thank you so much for that. You can find me at mattbankersports.com, MATTBANKER sports.com. I do consulting in college athletics, but that includes helping families and athletes navigate everything from recruiting, like, for example, hey, we're starting to get calls and maybe a couple of what seem to be verbal offers, like what questions should we be coming back to the coaches with? How do we strategize? Or we are making a recruiting visit to campus. Matt, can you help us? What are we missing here? What should we be thinking about? So anything along the lines of the process itself, that can include reviewing scholarships and agreements, also on the NIL front too. And sometimes if it's not something I specifically cover, I've got a strong network where I can refer to people that if they need it. So, and then I'm going to be launching a newsletter, and it's specifically geared for parents, and it's free, which is also a plus. It's important for me to get some content that helps people make good decisions, knowing that, as we talked about here in the last half hour, KB, about how many different scenarios and variations of an experience this can look like. It's not one size fits all. And I try to hone in on some of those things that parents so that they're ready for that situation when, something happens in a couple of years with their son or daughter, including things like not just the recruiting process, but once you get to college, hey, your son or daughter might be transferring. What's that process look like? Because that's more of a prominent situation. So I do a variety of consulting in and around college sports. I've been in this industry for almost 25 years total. And yeah, happy to help. And if parents, families, athletes need that kind of assistance, as well as sports clubs, club directors, they have a lot of questions too, because things have changed so much. High school coaches, those sorts of folks, I can help them out as well. So mattbankersports.com, and appreciate you having me today.
Awesome. Thank you so much.